Merci.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm pleased to see you here as we resume the 26th meeting of the Plants Committee. Before we start, I would like to go back to the makeup of the working group on significant trade. Togo, yes, we confirm our interest. Togo and the IUCN have expressed interest in participating in that working group. I have agreed. I would like to ask if there is anyone else who would like to join in the work of any working group, despite not having said so yesterday. Are there any extra participants for any of the working groups we've established? I don't see any expressions of interest in doing so. One moment, I'm sorry. The DRC, which working group are you interested in participating in? Thank you. Significant, I think we're in significant trade, but CITES and forests. SIG trade we're already in, but CITES and forests would also interest us. Thank you. Thank you. Let me check with the Secretariat. Are there any other requests for the floor? Very good. We've taken note of your interest.
Ok, donc nous repartons.
We're going to go back to our working program now, and we're going to be looking at rosewood tree species. This is a document that was prepared by the Secretariat, and I would like to give the Secretariat the floor to introduce it. You have the floor.
J'ai oublié de demander s'ils étaient prêts.
I, of course, forgot to ask the Secretariat if they were ready, but when you're ready, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Document PC26 Doc 29 refers to rosewood tree species. Paragraph 2 of the document contains the decisions 19.243 to 19.245 as adopted at COP19. In paragraphs 3 to 9 of the document, the Secretariat has included progress in the implementation of decision 19.243, which directs it to subject to external resources, undertake, amongst other activities, a study on the conservation and trade in rosewood tree species. In anticipation of external funds being available, in the Annex 1 to the present document, the Secretariat has included draft terms of reference for the implementation of the study. These terms of reference build upon relevant progress made on this matter in the period between COP18 to COP19, as included in detail in Annexes 2 to 4 of the document. The Secretariat also notes that paragraph D of the decision calls for the organization of an international workshop to consider the outcomes of the study. Mindful of this, the draft terms of reference included in Annex 1 anticipate reporting preliminary findings and recommendations at the International Expert Workshop on NDF that will take place later this year. Madam Chair, the Plans Committee is invited to review and, if appropriate, revise the terms of reference contained in Annex 1 to the present document, and to make recommendations for consideration of the Standing Committee or the Conference of the Parties as appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Merci.
Thank you. We have just heard an introduction to document 29 with mention of the recommendations to the Plants Committee. The floor is open to committee members on document 29.
Le représentant de la région Amérique du Nord.
North America, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. This intervention is on behalf of the North American region. We thank the Secretariat for its report and note it is encouraged by progress shown on delivering the study on the conservation and trade of rosewood species called for in Decision 19.244, as well as of a plan to present the findings of the study to the working group on high-value timber tree species as envisioned at the envisioned International Expert Workshop on NDFs. We wish to note that under Decision 18.321, Rev. COP 19, the Secretariat is directed to undertake a study to assess the effect on Dalbergia and Geburtia species, both of which are in rosewood genera, in international trade of the exemptions contained in annotation #15 for finished musical instruments, parts and accessories, and conservation implications thereof. As PC 26 document 29 requires the Secretariat to commission a study on the conservation and trade of all rosewood tree species, that study being by far broader in scope and therefore likely to be more informative than is the study proposed for annotation #15, we believe that the rosewood tree study should logically take place in advance of or at the same time as the study called for in PC 26 document 37. The North American region believes that the broad study called for in document 29 has greater potential to generate relevant information than does the study called for in document 37. We believe, therefore, that to avoid duplication of effort, the document 29 rosewood tree species study should seek to include elements of the annotation #15 study, or at the very least be undertaken with the goals of that study in mind. Thank you, Chair.
Je remercie.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to give the floor to the representative of the Africa region. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving us a chance to comment on document 26.29. As it is the first time to speak, as a region, first we thank the government of Switzerland for hosting this meeting. We thank the CITES Secretariat for well organization of the meeting, but also congratulate you, Madam Chair, for being re-elected as a chairperson for the Plant Committee. So as the Africa region, we thank the CITES Secretariat for the efforts being made to secure funds for the proposed study. For a long time, there has been discussion on rosewood from Madagascar, which is of high value. So as a region, we think that we request for member states to be given more time and comment so that we can come up with good findings which will be applicable even to other member states which are range states of rosewood species. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Je remercie.
Thank you, sir. I don't see any requests for the floor from committee members. I would now like to give the floor to any observer parties who would like to address this issue. The United Kingdom has the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The UK thanks the Secretariat for this document, as the need for further study on rosewood species is urgently needed. We would like to express our support for the intervention made by the North American region as well. Additionally, activity 4.1 on output 4 of the terms of reference suggests that a summary report of activities undertaken in output 1, 2 and 3 will be available for consideration at the International NDF workshop scheduled to take place in December 2023. This timeframe is very short, and the UK would like to bring attention to the possible need to streamline some of the outputs or prioritise activities in order to ensure the results are comprehensive and robust within the proposed timeline to ensure that it's feasible and achievable. Alternatively, the timeline for this study could be extended to ensure that the work is to a very high standard. However, in order to be able to feed into the NDF workshop, as suggested, the UK recommends that output 1 is prioritised, particularly the work described in 1.3, paragraphs C and D, as these are the most pertinent to the NDF workshop due to take place in December of this year. Thank you.
Merci.
I would like to thank the UK representative. Would any other observer parties like to take the floor?
Donne la parole aux observateurs.
The floor is now open to observers.
De parole.
I see no requests for the floor. The Secretariat has the floor.
Merci.
Thank you. In the light of what we have just heard, the Plants Committee agrees that the Secretariat to take the views expressed into account when dealing with the study and its terms of reference. Thank you.
Merci. Donc, le prochain point à l'ordre.
Thank you. The next agenda item concerns botanical nomenclature. We have 42.2 first of all, then 42.1, and then 42.3. I would like to give the floor to the nomenclature specialist who will introduce PC 2642.2.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The document PC 26, Doc 42.2, on the higher taxon listings in the appendices provide information relating to Decision 19.272. This decision instructs the Animals and Plants Committees to review the impacts of existing and future higher taxon listings in the appendices within the framework of the provisions in Annex 3 of Resolution Conf 9.24 Rev Cop 17 on criteria for amendment of Appendices 1 and 2. Further guidance and recommendations as necessary should be proposed for consideration by the Standing Committee as it addresses Decision 19.273. Higher taxon listings in the appendices enable a group of taxonomically related species to be listed under a single entry. These are usually species that look alike and or face similar effects from international trade. Higher taxon listings also provide stability to the appendices and associated national legislation when taxonomic and or nomenclatural changes occur to the species contained within the higher taxon. Over the years, a number of cases of higher taxon listings created complex situations, emphasizing the need to consider the impacts of existing and future higher taxon listings. Paragraph 5 of the current document provides 3 examples to illustrate such cases. Here, it is important to consider whether the proposed amendments to the appendices are substantive or non-substantive in nature. The difference between substantive and non-substantive changes and their implications for implementation of the Convention is summarized in paragraphs 7 and 8 of the current document. When a change in the name of a taxon is proposed, the original intent of the proposal to list the taxon should be considered. Also, the adoption of standard nomenclature references assists in determining whether the scope of the taxon will be redefined through a proposed change in a taxon name. While reviewing the impacts of higher taxon listings in the appendices, the Animals and Plants Committees may wish to identify the higher taxon listings in the appendices that do not have a standard nomenclature listed in the Annex to Resolution Conf 12.11 Ref Cop 19 and propose priority taxa for which standard nomenclature references should be developed. The Plants Committee is invited to review the scientific implications and impacts of higher taxon listings in the appendices, taking into consideration the aspects raised in the present document. In addition, the committee is invited to consider whether the difference between a higher taxon listing and a list of all the individual species in that higher taxon is sufficiently substantive to require a formal proposal to change a listing in the appendices, or that a complete list of species may be replaced with a listing of the higher taxon under the mandate of Resolution Conf 12.11 Ref Cop 19 on standard nomenclature. Madam Chair, depending on the outcomes of the discussions, I suggest for your consideration the establishment of a working group with an intersessional mandate and coordinating or joining with the corresponding working group of the upcoming Animals Committee, in line with the recommendations contained in paragraph 14 of this document, to develop draft recommendations and guidance to be presented at a joint session of AC 33 and PC 27, scheduled to take place in 2024. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Je remercie.
I would like to thank the nomenclature specialist for that statement. The floor is now open to Plants Committee members. Asia has the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Asia thanks the specialist on botanical nomenclature, the specialist on zoological nomenclature, as well as the Secretariat for preparing the document. The higher taxon listings of specific groups of species in the appendices have scientific implications and impacts on the implementation of the appendices and could be solved by submitting amendment proposals, designating or updating the standard nomenclature references, and in the case of some higher taxon listings, considering whether to specify the taxonomic authorities on the appendix column. We agreed to the establishment of a joint intersessional working group to review the information and develop draft recommendations or guidance for consideration of the next joint session of the meetings next year. Thank you, Chair.
I would like to thank the representative of the Asia region, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Africa region. You have the floor.
It was a legacy. OK. Donc, je vois plus de demandes.
I don't see any further requests from committee members. The floor is now open to observer parties.
États-Unis, vous avez la parole.
The United States has the floor.
Thank you. The United States thanks the nomenclature specialists with assistance from the Secretariat for drafting this document. We do feel it is important to clarify the complex situations, example, empty shells, inclusion of previous unlisted species, intent, etc., created by higher taxon listings. We would support the suggested way forward. However, we think it is premature to consider and would oppose amending Annex 3 of Resolution Conf 9.24, Rev. Cop 17. We would rather consider whether this issue is substantive enough to warrant amendments to Resolution Conf 12.11, Rev. Cop 19 on standard nomenclature. The United States supports consideration of the above during an intersessional working group, which the U.S. would wish to join as a member. Thank you.
I would like to thank the representative of the United States, and I now give the floor to Canada.
Thank you, Chair. Canada also supports the proposal to establish a joint intersessional working group to undertake. In particular, we would like to see consideration of those actions proposed in paragraph 12 and 13 of the document, and we do take into account and note the U.S.'s point on, I believe it's 12C of that document. And as with U.S., we would also be interested in joining the intersessional working group. Thank you.
Je remercie.
Thank you, Canada. Would any other observer parties like to take the floor? I don't see any requests for the floor. The floor is now open to observers.
Je ne vois pas de demande de parole.
I don't see any requests for the floor from observers. The Plants Committee will now establish an intersessional working group under this document. Bearing in mind that there has also been a suggestion that there be an intersessional working group established for the next agenda item, I would like to invite the nomenclature specialist to introduce 42.1, after which I will read out the terms of reference for the working group and see who would be interested in participating in that intersessional working group, bearing in mind that some delegations have already expressed that interest. I would like to give the floor to the nomenclature specialist to introduce 42.1.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The document PC 26 Doc 42.1 on the nomenclature of Appendix 3 listings provides information relating to Decision 18.313, Rev. Cop 19. This decision instructs the Animals and Plants Committees to evaluate how nomenclature changes affect Appendix 3 listings within the framework of the current guidance in paragraph 2G of Resolution Conf 12.11 Rev. Cop 19 on standard nomenclature. Further guidance and recommendations that address how such nomenclature changes are to be handled should be proposed for consideration by the Standing Committee, which will consider the matter under Decision 18.314, Rev. Cop 19. Taxonomic and nomenclature changes, such as the merging and splitting of species, redefine that species and can alter the range states in which the redefined listed species occur, and where a split-out species occur. Some general background information on this is provided in paragraph 6 to 9 of the current document. The process to update the nomenclature of species and higher taxa listed in CITES Appendices 1 and 2 is well established. However, due to the nature of Appendix 3 and its specific process of including and excluding species in it, applying that same process could create unforeseen outcomes. Detailed information on the effects of taxonomic nomenclatural changes on species listed in Appendix 3 is provided in paragraphs 10 to 21 of this document. Paragraph 22 suggests that a modified approach may need to be applied to take the particular conditions of Appendix 3 into account when nomenclatural changes are proposed for any of its species. Under this approach, the Animals or Plants Committees can be consulted to determine if the change would alter the scope of protection for fauna and flora under the Convention. If the proposed nomenclature change could lead to inclusion or deletion of a species or populations in the appendices, the Secretariat could consult the listing party and other affected range states, and Appendix 3 could be amended based on feedback from the parties. Alternatively, the Secretariat could inform the listing party about the nomenclature change and its implications, and invite the party to consult with affected range states and submit a request to amend the Appendix 3 listing. This should preferably be done in a timely manner to allow any changes in Appendix 3 to be published with the changes to Appendix 1 and 2 after each COP meeting. These consultations should be done in such a manner as to not create undue administrative burden on the Secretariat, range state parties, or the nomenclature specialists. The Plants Committee is invited to review the document and make recommendations as appropriate, and to consider submitting an updated version of the present document to the Standing Committee for its consideration. So, Madam Chair, depending on the outcomes of the decision, I suggest for your consideration the establishment of a working group with an intersessional mandate and coordinating or joining with the corresponding working group of the upcoming Animals Committee in line with the recommendations contained in paragraph 23 of this document. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci.
I'd like to thank the nomenclature specialist, and I now open the floor to members of the Plants Committee. Asia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Asia thanks our specialist and the Secretariat for preparing the document. And the nomenclature of species in Appendix 3 has been a complicated administrative issue. As noted in the document, including the species in Appendix 3 is an unilateral decision and a voluntary action by an individual party, but needs the cooperation of all the parties. And PC 26.42.1/AC 32.45.1 has explained the background of the taxonomy and nomenclature, the effects of taxonomic nomenclatural changes on species listed in CITES Appendix 3 has required by the decision, and drawn conclusions. The conclusions in paragraph 22 of the document gave potential guidance that may address how such complicated issue is to be handled. And we have some preference is whether we could suggest that the paragraph of the conclusion be clarified as a guidance for the next step, and that the Secretariat consult with the relevant parties for earlier inclusion in Appendix 3, invite them to consider the background analysis and conclusions of this document, and to supplement the nomenclature reference on the species that they prefer. so that the Secretariat can return the information gathered to the committees to discuss the way forward. And also, I agree with the botanic specialist for if we can really establish an intersessional working group with the AC and to discuss how to draft the revisions and recommendations for the considerations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Je remercie la représentante.
I thank the representative of the Asia region. I see no further request for the floor from members of the committee. So now I open the floor to observer parties. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So Canada welcomes this document and congratulates the nomenclature specialists for their excellent work. We do support submitting an updated version of the present document to the Standing Committee and do support having further consideration of what those updates might be in the intersessional working group. When we reviewed, we had a couple thoughts about possible recommendations. For example, we would support a recommendation to amend Resolution Conf 12.11 to have paragraph 2G that would have the Secretariat being directed to liaise with implicated parties to develop a case-by-case approach for when a change in nomenclature impacts an Appendix 3 species listing. And we have some thoughts on language, which we would be happy to discuss in the intersessional working group. And we also think the information on the effects of taxonomic nomenclature changes on a species contained in paragraphs 10 to 21 of this document is quite important and could potentially be captured in a new annex in Resolution Conf 9.25. So we look forward to discussions in the intersessional working group. Thank you, Chair.
Merci au Canada.
Thank you, Canada. I see no further request for the floor from observer parties. Observers, the floor is now open. Please go ahead.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam Chair. This subject seems simple at the beginning, but it can often be complex because Appendix 3 and amendments to it are completely in the hands of the parties on an individual basis. So any proposal that might be adopted, which is, of course, desirable, would need the agreement of the parties concerned. And in practice, it's not always easy to persuade a party to amend a listing to Appendix 3 that's been requested. So it will no doubt require considerable efforts from the Secretariat. But we must try to progress along this, and I would like to take this opportunity to say that if a working group were to be set up, we would like to take part in it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Je remercie.
I thank IWMC. I do not see any further requests for the floor.
Donc, comme nous l'avons entendu.
So, as we heard, there will be a working group, a joint working group established on an intersessional basis, so an intersessional joint working group. And so I will read the terms of reference, and then we will take expressions of interest in participating in the working group, knowing that this, bearing in mind that joint intersessional nomenclature working group will be completed at the next meeting of the Animals Committee, and we will be notified of the final composition of the working group as defined for the first intersessional working group we've established yesterday on a joint basis. So I'll read the terms of reference in English.
Established a joint intersessional nomenclature working group. 2. Review the scientific implications and impacts of existing and future higher taxon listings in the appendices, taking into consideration the aspect raised in document PC 26 doc 42.2, AC 32 doc 45.2. B. Develop draft recommendations and guidance. Oh no, sorry. B. Review and revise document PC 26 doc 42.1, AC 32 doc 45.1, and C. Develop draft recommendations and guidance to the joint session of the 33rd meeting of the Animals Committee and the 27th meeting of the Plant Committees scheduled to take place in 2024. Is it fine? Alors maintenant.
So I will now take the names so we can define the composition of the working group. Committee members who wish to participate in this working group, please express your interest now. We have Asia region. Thank you. Now, observer parties who wish to take part in the working group. United Kingdom, Canada, United States, European Union, France, Georgia, Germany, India, Madagascar, Mexico. Thank you. Now, observers. IWMC, SSN, UNEP, WCMC. So, I think that is everyone.
Et pour...
So for the Plants Committee, we have the nomenclature specialist who will be chairing this intersessional working group. Thank you.
Je vais donner la...
I will now give the floor to the Secretariat so they can read the working group list. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The working group membership is as follows. It will be chaired by the nomenclature specialist, Ronald Klopper, and members of the committee joining that working group is the Asia region. Parties who voiced interest are the UK, Canada, USA, European Union, France, Georgia, Germany, India, Madagascar, and Mexico. And IGOs and NGOs who voiced their interests are IWMC, SSN, and UNEP WCMC. Thanks.
Merci, Secrétariat.
I thank the Secretariat. We will now go on to the next item on our agenda, which is item 42.3, the development of a standardized global checklist of species. And I give the floor to the nomenclature specialist for this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The document PC 26, Doc 42.3, on the development of a standardized global checklist of species provides information relating to Decision 19.274. This decision instructs the Animals and Plants Committees, through their nomenclature specialists, to participate in initiatives to develop a standardized global checklist of species and to report on progress at COP20. Paragraphs 3 to 5 of this document elaborate on the involvement of the two nomenclature specialists in ongoing global initiatives aimed at producing global consensus classifications for plants and animals, and highlights the potential benefits thereof for CITES. The Plants Committee is invited to take note of this document. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci, Madame la spécialiste.
I thank the nomenclature specialist, and I now open the floor to members of the committee for comment.
Je ne vois pas de...
I see no request for the floor. I now give the floor to observer parties.
États-Unis, vous avez...
USA, you have the floor.
Thank you. We note the development of a standardized global checklist of species is in its infancy at this point. The U.S. currently takes note of this document and hopes the AC and PC will do the same. We do, however, remain cautious about the development and utility of such a standard database because of issues associated with its implementation in a regulatory permitting framework. Nomenclature changing frequently creates a problem for the implementation of permitting. The United States generally takes a conservative approach to what checklists are followed for standard nomenclature. Thank you.
Je remercie les États-Unis.
Thank you, USA.
Je donne la parole aux...
I give the floor to observers.
Je ne vois pas...
I see no request for the floor. So on this item 42.3, the Plants Committee takes note of this document.
Nous passons maintenant à l'examen du...
We will now consider item 43.1 on the agenda. So now the floor is open to the specialist on nomenclature to cover document 43.1. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The overview document, PC26, Doc 43.1, highlights the updates of agreements of the Conference of the Parties at its 19th meeting relating to standard nomenclature references, decisions in force relevant to nomenclature for flora, and the work plan of the Plants Committee in matters related to nomenclature. COP19 adopted or revised 10 sets of decisions on nomenclature matters for flora as included in the annex to the present document. These cover several aspects relevant to checklists and standard references of several taxa. Updates on the implementation of decisions relating to rosewoods and orchids are reported on in document PC26, Doc 43.1. While progress on the implementation of decisions on aloes, Malagasy ebonies, kumarus, African mahoganies, pachypodiums, rose roots, yews, and cacti are reported on in documents PC26, Docs 43.2 to 43.9. COP19 further adopted 3 sets of nomenclature decisions with mandates addressed to both the Animals and Plants Committee. These cover the nomenclature of Appendix 3 listings, higher taxon listings in the appendices, and the development of a standardized global checklist of species. These are reported on in PC 26 documents 42.1 and 42.3, which we have just dealt with in the previous agenda item. Concerning the checklist for rosewoods, COP19 adopted the newly produced CITES Dalbergia checklist as standard reference for rosewoods. We would like to thank the team at the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew for producing the checklist in an innovative and novel way, where a large amount of information is provided in a very concise and user-friendly format. And we would also like to acknowledge the European Union for the funding provided towards production of this checklist. Going forward, and subject to the availability of external resources, the possibility of providing an updated, annotated edition of the CITES Dalbergia checklist will be investigated, and a report on progress will be delivered at PC27. Concerning the nomenclature of Appendix 2 listed orchids, COP19 adopted the newly produced CITES Appendix 2 orchid checklist as standard reference for orchids listed on Appendix 2. We would like to thank the team at the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew and UNEP WCMC for their hard work and dedication during production of this checklist. Going forward, the Secretariat will issue a notification in the first quarter of 2024 to seek feedback from parties and relevant experts on their experience in using the standard nomenclature reference for Appendix 2 listed orchids. Subject to the availability of external resources, the Secretariat will prepare a report on progress to be delivered at PC27. At COP19, 3 matters were proposed for inclusion in the Flora Nomenclature Work Plan, as outlined in paragraph 17 of the current document. Additionally, in my role as Nomenclature Specialist to the Plants Committee, further aspects that could be added to the work plan were brought to my attention as outlined in paragraph 18 of the current document. Madam Chair, I would like to suggest that I also introduce the other 8 documents before we open the floor for discussion. Would you agree to that?
Can you repeat the last?
No problem. I would suggest that I also introduce the other 8 documents under agenda point 43 before we open the floor for discussion. Would you agree to that?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. I believe that will save us a bit of time. Regarding the nomenclature of aloes, the document PC26, Doc 43.2, and its annexes provide a summary of discussions thus far relating to the nomenclature of allos and related decisions. It was previously agreed that updating the standard nomenclature reference for the allos would best be done separately from that of the genus Pachypodium, since these two groups are both taxonomically and botanically different, and relevant expertise is centered in different networks and institutions. It is estimated that an updated CITES checklist for allos could cover around 610 species across 7 genera. Annex 1 of the current document contains a draft terms of reference for the development of an updated checklist for allos. The Plants Committee is invited to provide comments on this draft terms of reference. Regarding the Cactaceae checklist and its supplement, the document PC26, Doc 43.3, and its annexes provide a summary of feedback received following notification to the parties number 2023, number 26, which invited parties to inform the Secretariat on their experience in using the 3rd edition of the CITES Cactaceae checklist and its 2018 supplement, and any issues that may arise as they apply these lists, including feedback to improve it in the light of relevant updates of cacti taxonomy. The Plants Committee is invited to review the utility of the Cactaceae checklist and its supplement in the light of this feedback from parties. Regarding the nomenclature of Ebonis, Diospyros species, populations of Madagascar, the document PC26, Doc 43.4, and its annexes provide a summary of discussions thus far relating to the nomenclature of Malagasy ebonis and related decisions. It is estimated that there are around 250 species of Diospyros in Madagascar. However, only the 88 large tree species included in the current standard reference are known or suspected to produce wood of commercial value. The format in which the updated reference is produced should be carefully considered in the light of the changing taxonomy and nomenclature as a result of ongoing research on Malagasy ebonis. Annex 1 of the current document contains a draft terms of reference for the development of an updated checklist for Diospyros species, populations of Madagascar. The Plants Committee is invited to provide comments on this draft terms of reference. Regarding the standard nomenclature of Cumarus or dipteryx species, the document PC26, Doc 43.5 and its annex provide background information relating to the nomenclature of Cumarus and related decisions. COP19 agreed to the inclusion of the genus Dipteryx in Appendix 2, but did not adopt a standard nomenclature reference. The nomenclature and taxonomy of the genus Dipteryx is currently not entirely resolved, and estimates for the number of species vary between 14 to 17. A suitable nomenclature reference must be identified, taking into consideration the ongoing revisions in the genus Dipteryx. Regarding the standard nomenclature of African mahoganies or kaya species, the document PC26, Doc 43.6 and its annex provide background information relating to the nomenclature of African mahoganies and related decisions. COP19 agreed to the inclusion of African populations of the genus Kaya in Appendix 2 and also adopted a time-stamped download of the Plants of the World Online as standard nomenclature reference. The nomenclature and taxonomy of the genus Kaya is currently not entirely resolved, and a full taxonomic revision of the genus is underway. The most recent revision includes 8 African species, but there is uncertainty about a further species from the Comores. In the light of ongoing taxonomic revisions in the genus Kaya, The possibility of identifying a suitable nomenclature reference must be investigated. Regarding the nomenclature of pachypodiums, the document PC26, Doc 43.7, and its annexes provide a summary of discussions thus far relating to the nomenclature of pachypodiums and related decisions. It was previously agreed that updating of the standard nomenclature reference for the genus Pachypodium would best be done separately from that of the aloes, since these two groups are both taxonomically and botanically different, and relevant expertise is centered in different networks and institutions. It is estimated that an updated CITES checklist for the genus Pachypodium could cover around 22 species. Annex 1 of the current document contains a draft terms of reference for the development of an updated checklist for the genus Pachypodium. The Plants Committee is invited to provide comments on this draft terms of reference. Regarding the standard nomenclature of rose roots or rhodiola species, the document PC26, Doc 43.8 and its annex provide background information relating to the nomenclature of rose roots and related decisions. COP19 agreed to the inclusion of the genus Rhodiola in Appendix 2, but did not adopt a standard nomenclature reference. The nomenclature and taxonomy of the genus Rhodiola is not entirely resolved, and there is uncertainty regarding certain taxon delimitations, synonymy, and distribution of species and infraspecific taxa. Estimates for the number of species vary between 58 to 90. A suitable nomenclature reference must be identified, taking into consideration the nomenclatural uncertainty in the genus Rhodiola. And then the last document regards the nomenclature of use or taxus species. The document PC26, Doc 43.9 and its annexes provide a summary of discussions thus far relating to the nomenclature of use and related decisions. The taxonomy and nomenclature of the genus Taxus is complicated and unresolved, and the morphological distinction of certain species is difficult. The number of recognized species differs significantly among different sources, but it is estimated that an updated CITES checklist for the genus Taxa could cover around 12 species. Annex 1 of the current document contains a draft terms of reference for the development of an updated checklist for the genus Taxus. The Plants Committee is invited to provide comments on this draft terms of reference. So, Madam Chair, depending on the outcomes of the discussions, I suggest for your consideration the establishment of an in-session working group in line with the recommendations contained in each of these documents, including noting the progress made, and to formulate recommendations on some of these topics, including the drafting of nomenclature-related decisions where appropriate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I would like to thank the nomenclature specialist. The floor is now open to committee members. For any comments, North America, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the North American region, I have some comments on the overview that was presented in document 43.1. The North American region has concerns regarding the biological and trade information requested in section C of the Secretariat's draft terms of reference for the new checklist for aloe, Diospyros, Pachypodium, and Taxus. We feel that the information requested is moving beyond that of what is necessary in a CITES nomenclatural reference of accepted names, scientific synonyms, and species distributions, and into the realm of identification material and implementation guidance, which are guided by their own resolutions, distinct from Resolution Conf 12.11 on standard nomenclature. There are also costs and procedural aspects to consider with the inclusion of additional non-taxonomic and nomenclatural information into checklists. Requiring this information for each species will increase the total cost to produce a checklist and extend the time necessary to complete a checklist, as various sources of information will need to be referenced and verified. Furthermore, there are existing publications and online sources for such information. One such example is the Succulent Plants, a guide to CITES listed species, which include the information on aloes and pachypodiums proposed in Section C of the Secretariat's draft terms of reference. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci.
I would like to thank the representative of North America. Would any other committee members like to take the floor? I don't see any requests for the floor. I would now like to open the floor to observer parties. Mexico to be followed by Canada. Thank you, Madam. We would like to thank the nomenclature specialist for all of the work done in preparing and presenting these documents on these different taxonomic groups. We'd like to make one clarification with respect to an endemic species in Mexico, which is considered a valid name, and we would suggest that it be Annex 1 listed, where we have the whole genus listed. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to participate in the working group as we're involved in others. And we would also like to say that we agree with the North American colleague. We do really feel that what we need to do here is identify the names used by the conventions so that they are the right names when it comes to international trade. And if we are to extend that work to other areas, it does have cost implications as well as workload implications, and might touch upon areas that are covered by other provisions of the convention. We do think that we should be focusing here with respect to identification and the correct nomenclature. We have to bear in mind what the taxonomic changes are that we have to take on board, and that has to be the priority. Thank you.
Merci, Mexique.
Thank you, Mexico. Canada has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our comments refer to document 45.5, standard nomenclature for Coumaris, but they refer equally to document 43.6, standard nomenclature for African mahoganies. Canada supports the recommendations made in PC 26, Doc 45.5, and the direction of Decision 19283, as the identification of a suitable nomenclatural reference is required to bring taxonomic certainty to the COP19 listing of genus Dipteryx, which was described in COP19 Prop 48 as presenting considerable taxonomic uncertainty. A rapid response to determine a nomenclatural reference for genus Dipteryx for inclusion in the annex to Resolution Conf 1211, Rev Cop 19, on standard nomenclature should be considered a priority action for the Plants Committee in order to assist species identification, to contribute to accuracy and consistency of global wood sample databases, and to enable effective implementation of the Convention for Species in the genus Dipteryx. Thank you, Chair.
Merci.
I would like to thank Canada. Would any other observers like to take the floor? Korea, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We deeply thank the nomenclature specialist for preparing and presenting these documents. And regarding nomenclature of Texas, the Republic of Korea concurs with the notion that genus texts accumulate changes from a taxonomy perspective. In particular, you fully acknowledge the suggestion put forth in recent taxonomy studies that certain species, such as Texas puana, should be classified as the same species as others. To address this issue, we believe that the recommended research mentioned in this document will be necessary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci.
Thank you. I'm going to close the list of speakers. The committee has noted the series of decisions on nomenclature matters as we have in PC 26 43.1, as well as the progress made with respect to 18307 Rev Cop 19 and 18308 Rev Cop 19 on the Rosewood checklist for Rosewoods, and decisions 285 and 286 on the nomenclature of Appendix 2 listed orchids. Now, as recommended, we are going to establish a working group, an in-session working group. I would like to invite the Secretariat to read the mandate of the working group. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The mandate of the working group that compiles all 9 documents 43.1 to 43.9 will be as follows. The in-session working group shall first review documents PC 26 document 43.1 to 43.9 and A. Develop recommendations for additional nomenclature matters outlined in paragraphs 17 to 19 of document PC 26 document 43.1 on overview of flora nomenclature matters for the period COP19 to COP20. B. Consider and evaluate the nomenclatural issues and identify suitable, if any, nomenclature standard references for amendment of the Annex 2 Resolution, Conference 12.11, Revision COP19 on standard nomenclature. 4. Little I. Dipteryx spec as outlined in document PC 26, document 43.5 on standard nomenclature for Gumarus and its annex. Little I. Kaya spec as outlined in document PC 26, document 43.6 on standard nomenclature for African mahoganies, Kaya spec and its annex. And little I. Rhodiola spec as outlined in document PC 26, document 43.8 on standard nomenclature for rose roots and its annex. C. Review the utility of the CITES Cactaceae checklist and its supplement with regard to issues that arise as parties apply these lists, including feedback to improve it in the light of relevant updates of cacti taxonomy, contained in document PC26, document 43.3 on Cactasia checklist and its supplement and its annexes. D, provide input into the draft terms of reference contained in little I, Annex 1 to document 43.2 on nomenclature for aloes. Little double I, Annex 1 to document 43.4 on nomenclature for ebonies, Diospyros populations of Madagascar. Little triple I, Annex 1 to document 43.7 on nomenclature for pachypodiums. And little 4 I's, Annex 1 to document 43.9 on nomenclature for use, taxospec. And 2, report its recommendations to the committee. Thanks.
Merci.
Thank you, sir. We have heard the proposed terms of reference for this working group. I would now like committee members who would like to participate in the work of the working group to please indicate their interest.
Membres du comité, vous avez la parole.
Committee members, you have the floor.
Je donne donc la parole aux parties observatrices.
Observer parties. Would observer parties interested in participating let me know? The United Kingdom, the United States, Germany, the European Union, Madagascar, South Africa, France, the Russian Federation, the Republic of Korea, China, Switzerland. Would you like to participate? Yes? Very good. Zimbabwe. I would now like to ask which observers would like to participate in the working group. UNEP WCMC. Thank you for those indications of interest. I would like to invite the Secretariat to read out the working group members, just to make sure we have everyone. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The working group will be chaired by the nomenclature specialist for flora, Ms. Ronelle Klopper. No members voiced their interest to be additionally represented. Parties that will join the working group are the United Kingdom, the USA, Germany, the European Union, Madagascar, South Africa, France, Korea, Russia, China, Switzerland, and Zimbabwe. And the sole IGO that will join the working group is UNEP WCMC. Thanks.
Merci.
Thank you. And I would also like to extend thanks to the nomenclature specialist. We are now going to start our working program for today. We're going to now take up agenda item 18, sustainability criteria for timber non-detriment findings. This document was prepared by the European Union, and I would like to give you the floor. Thank you, Madam. Document 18 on criteria for sustainability for timber NDFs covers sustainability and the way in which NDFs are prepared. The European Union is a major timber consumer with a high level of imports, and that is why we consider that we do have a great responsibility when it comes to the sustainable use of timber species. NDFs are key for CITES effectiveness when it comes to assessing whether international trade is detrimental to species maintenance. It is also important to ensuring that species can be maintained in their whole range. CITES is implemented in the EU through EU rules on wildlife trade, and we have very strict internal rules which require NDFs for the import of taxes from that are Appendix 2 listed that have to be dealt with by the scientific authority of the member state that is importing. This document gives some consideration to the EU considerations on NDFs for timber species that are Appendix 2 listed. First of all, the NDFs for timber species is a matter for the consideration of information on by the Forest Management Authority within each country, just to make sure that the use of woods is sustainable in the long term. The sustainable use and maintenance of a tree species in its ecosystem requires a long-term legal commitment to ensuring that woods are maintained. And there is also a need for forest management, which avoids land conversion, including clear felling. This also involves other EU commitments, such as the proposal for a new regulation to stop deforestation and wood degradation. The EU would stress that timber from non-permanent forest zones cannot get any kind of go-ahead despite the species or notwithstanding the species or the country of origin. Secondly, when it comes to harvesting and the sustainable use of species, we have to ensure that those trees that are exploited have to be able to regenerate and recruit, and this has to be properly planned for so that there is a good cycle when it comes to the harvesting of these trees. This means that there needs to be a recovery period after any period of felling, and this has to involve projections with respect to the forest's capacity for regeneration and recruitment to this regardless of the biology of the species and the local demographics or forestry practices. We have a recovery index which was provided by Durieux and Madron and Forney in 1997, and this is usually used by forestry management units in Central African countries. In the future, NDFs for import applications of timber species into the EU will require the regeneration capacities of felled populations. This has to be done through very strict rules, and it will involve minimal thresholds for the exploitation of trees, so that there has to be strong scientific justification for these when it comes to considering regeneration and recovery capacities. Given that NDFs are very important when it comes to sustainable exploitation of timber species, this document is important when it comes to the EU's approach to NDFs. We would therefore welcome any comments from parties and any improvements that might be suggested, and this could be done bilaterally and multilaterally, and this is particularly true when it comes to other importing states. We also feel that any view or result of this debate will have to be made available to the working group on high-value timber species in the international workshop on NDFs that is supposed to be held in December of 2023. Thank you. I would like to thank the EU representative for that introduction. The floor is now open to committee members. Asia, you have the floor.
Asia thanks the EU for preparing the document on the sustainability criteria for timber exports into the EU and its call for parties to provide feedback on these considerations. We would like to encourage all parties, especially range states, that export CITES-listed timber to provide this feedback so that the EU can understand their processes set in place to ensure the sustainable management and conservation of all CITES-listed timber species. Perhaps the CITES Secretariat could also compile this feedback so that it will be useful to provide guidance.
I would like to thank the representative of Asia. I now give the floor to the representative of North America, to be followed by the representative of Africa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The North American region believes that the most suitable forum for exploring the issues raised by the European Union in Document 18 is the envisioned International Expert Workshop on Non-Detriment Findings and discussions of the specific workstream on high-value timbers. The North American region believes that these discussions, which should include a range of considerations for making non-detriment findings based on the best available scientific information, including forest types, species composition, domestic legislation, and varying sustainable land management approaches, have the greatest potential to generate appropriate and applicable guidance for making and evaluating non-detriment findings. We believe that the expert workshop will allow for a more complete and deliberative discussion of the context and considerations faced by scientific authorities when undertaking their obligations. As such, the North American region is not in a position to evaluate or take note of this document. We would simply refer PC 26 Document 18 to the Technical Advisory Group of the International Expert Workshop on Non-Detriment Findings for consideration as appropriate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Je remercie.
I would like to thank the representative of the North American region, and I now give the floor to the representative of the African region. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving us a chance to comment on document 26.18. Yeah, as our colleagues in North America, we are in line. Africa region do not support or accept the proposal as put forward by the EU. There has been no pre-consultation with African countries regarding the matter. Africa has a lot of wood that comes from unreserved forests, the so-called non-permanent domains. We need to continue adding value of wood and trade internationally. So we need to sit together with the EU and develop modalities or appropriate ways of recognizing wood harvested outside the forest reserves. As Africa have a lot of forests which are outside reserved forests. So we recognize that NDF have been developed most of the time from forest reserves. Therefore, harvesting of these trees for international trade has been done so, but we have been facing problems for wood which comes from unreserved forests, and we have a lot of wood. So we'd like to continue trading with you so that these trees can be source of good livelihood to our communities, but also add value. I mean, also add, be part of source of finance for conservation in our forests. Finally, we request African member states and observers to also comment on this agenda. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Je remercie.
I would like to thank the representative of the African region. I don't see any further requests for the floor from observer parties, from committee members, rather. I would now like to open the floor to observer parties. You have the floor. Thank you, Madam. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate you on your re-election, as this is the first time we have taken the floor. We would also like to congratulate you for the excellent way in which you are guiding our work. With respect to this document, PC 26, Doc 18, on sustainability criteria for timber NDFs, our ministry has the following to say. We would remind you that we are all well aware of what is at stake when it comes to sustainability for our Appendix 2 listed species. Our regulations, our domestic regulations are clear, and it is enshrined in all of our legislation when pertaining to the sustainability of these species. With respect to the EU document, the way in which some states have taken very strong measures has caused some problems for our producers, and we therefore would like to take time to consider this document carefully, and we would like to know whether this is a document that is for domestic or international consideration, and we wonder really if this is the best way of considering the sustainability of species and their regeneration capacity. We need to know what sorts of approaches being taken, and we wonder whether the EU is going to work with states parties when it comes to agreeing the approach. And we wonder why regulations might be taken specifically with respect to the Congo River Basin. We are developing, we are dealing with areas that have development issues that have to do with urbanization and other sorts of considerations, and therefore we consider some of these measures might actually clash with the international commitments made by states parties. We wonder whether the EU isn't actually acting against Cameroon's development ambitions when it comes to the sustainable use of its timber resources. The EU should consider the adverse effects of these measures on the development and the very social fabric of Cameroon. And we should also bear in mind that the EU always rejects the measures that we are proposing with respect to prunus, even though they are in keeping with the CITES. We wonder whether the European Union is actually having some kind of crisis of faith when it comes to CITES. We really do think that there is a need to actually ensure that we all work together on these sorts of issues. In conclusion, Madam, I really would like to request a number of clarifications in order to fully understand the EU document. And we therefore think that if we would like to ensure that we have to ensure that we really act in keeping with all of our decisions when it comes to the universal approach of EU measures. And this is a matter that should be taken into account by the high-level workshop on NDFs. And we do think that everything has to be done on a properly science-based approach. And we do have an information document available that we are prepared to make available to everyone. And the comments that we are making now are also endorsed by other Congo Basin parties, and we are going to be having a meet at lunchtime, which will help us work together on these sorts of issues. Thank you, Madam. Thank you, sir. I would now like to give the floor to Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Zimbabwe had an opportunity to discuss this issue with several other African member states that might be affected by this issue. And I wish to align my submission, Madam Chair, with those that have already been submitted by the committee member from the North American region. And also the representative from the African region, Cameroon, and other states that have echoed the similar sentiments. As a matter of principle, Madam Chair, I think it's only fair if there is sufficient consultations when this kind of an issue is being introduced, so that there is effective communication and rapport between potential trading partners, and taking into consideration the sentiments and views of the affected member states, particularly from the Congo Basin. We believe that our decisions within CITES are supposed to be guided by science. However, we also need to take a precautionary measure not to over-regulate something that is well regulated already. If it's not broken, then why fix it? Madam Chair, from the sentiments that we have gathered so far, and also from reviewing this specific document, it leaves a lot to be desired, that there is need to rethink this whole approach, and I think the proposed meeting on the NDFs will be the right platform to have further discussions on this. And we also, in addition, further recommend more interaction between the EU's scientific review group and also some scientists and experts from Africa, so that we are more progressive in our propositions. As it stands, this issue, Madam Chair, doesn't seem to be part of the solution puzzle that will address some specific matters that are affecting the species concerned. Therefore, there is need to rethink the whole matter, and we are not recommending for this because it will bring unnecessary burden. And I think also that it's not really aligned to the general agreed principle that is well spelled out in the CITES preamble, that parties and states are and should be the best protectors of their wild flora and fauna. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Je remercie
I thank the representative of Zimbabwe, and now we have the representative of Mexico to be followed by the DRC and the Russian Federation. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I underline myself with what we have heard from previous speakers. Although CITES allows for the application of stricter measures, this document comes to our attention because the practice is that export permits are covered by NDFs drawn up by the scientific authorities, and the term non-permanent forest domains is not a term in the convention, it's not in the glossary, and what exactly it means is something that's not clear. And in line with what was said by the representative of the North America region, from Africa region, the delegates from Cameroon and Zimbabwe, we're not in a position to take note of this document. We don't want to set a precedent which will imply tacit approval. I think we need to look into this further, and it calls into question the sovereignty of countries that issue CITES export permits that are covered by NDFs. The Plants Committee is a scientific forum, and perhaps, as other countries have suggested, this subject could review the scientific component in the expert group on NDFs or in another area. So our delegation is not in a position to take note of this document. Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
I thank you, and I now give the floor to DRC, followed by the Russian Federation. Thank you for giving me the floor. I am making this statement on behalf of the DRC on document 26.18, prepared by the European Union. I would like this to be kept in the minutes. And we thank the European Union for having taken the time, and as a major partner of the Congo Basin countries, and my country in particular, they are very much attached to sustainability of the forest areas, and they've provided technical support and so forth through many programs, and they have been working on programs linked to the application of the convention, and their funds is something that we would like to express our deep gratitude for. But as representative of the DRC, which is the guardian of the second largest forest area, which is considered the first lung of the planet in terms of carbon capture and work. So I'd like to express our concerns about the position presented here from the European Union, which seems to be scientifically floating, dangerous, economically and politically explosive, and it could be very problematic. This proposal doesn't have any certainty. It hasn't been stated if the 100% regeneration is based on which type of forest, and there's not scientific evidence, there's not evidence-based to evaluate the sustainability of the trees which are listed in CITES, without bearing in mind any particular forest area. When we talk about the 50% recovery rates and regeneration rates, when we think about Pericopsis elata in DRC under the NDFs, these have been approved by the Plants Committee. The non-scientific nature of this proposal doesn't consider the secondary effects, such as creating maybe confusion under the forest areas when we talk about the regeneration rate and so forth, and the calculation by its recovery rate, the amount of volume that is exploitable is normally a period of around 25 years. But it doesn't show any indication of the regeneration of a species or a whole area. So Pericopsis elata has a rate of 50 at least under the definitions of the NDF in 2021, and that's also in agreement with the forestry legislation which is in force in Congo and DRC, and it was approved by the European Union. And it was financed through programs on CITES species funded by the European Union. So here they're calling into question the outcomes of the studies that they have funded, and they're calling into question these results. So this proposal would be dangerous economically, because setting the regeneration indices to 100% or even 75% would be dangerous economically, because that would mean that the annual cutting and logging would be covered. And it would have an impact on local communities if the European Union proposal were to be adopted and the regeneration index were to be put at 75% even. That would have major consequences on the river communities, the forestry concessions, and on the forests themselves. So this proposal is politically explosive as well, because it would risk bringing an end to the forestry industry, even damage the regeneration. And it would mean that there might be uprisings in local communities, and it could create areas of tension. And there is no legal instrument, international legal instrument, that is being used as a basis for this. And it's not fair to request that states change their national legislation in order to put in a regeneration rate which is not available. And it could push many forestry-dependent countries to reconsider their commitments to CITES, and this is something we don't want to see. So my country rejects the proposal of the European Union and would like to call on the members of the plants committees to consider this and the effects of NDF for Pericopsis elata, and to look at the studies already funded by the European Union, which have looked at the sustainability levels which were already acceptable and which would then be applied to other species. Otherwise, what is the point of all the efforts that have been made by the European Union and the countries in the Congo Basin, in particular the DRC? So rather than presenting such a proposal, I would suggest that we look at the protected areas, and I am most reverent, but I suggest that we should organize discussion with the countries in the area so that we can look at the current sustainability levels and take into account the forestry dynamics in each region and each country. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative from the DRC, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We won't be performing. We support the countries that have spoken. Thank you.
Je vous remercie pour votre intervention.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Malaysia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and those who have spoken before me. With regards to the proposal of the EU, Malaysia notes the view of North America that this is not a suitable forum for this proposal. Currently, Malaysia cannot agree with this proposal and would like to propose a more thorough discourse on this matter, if ever. As of now, the proposal of the EU is superseding and more demanding than the national and international legality verification process for certification that is already being used, such as PEFC and FSC, for timber trade that is already in place. As of now, if you refer to page 4 and 5 of the RSG attached in the proposal, Malaysia is already affected pertaining to the Aquilaria species from Malaysia, and we think that we have a few more that is pending approval from the EU. Madam Chair, we need more time to digest the consequences of this proposal. Malaysia also agrees with Mexico that the new terminology, non-permanent forest domains, used in this proposal, and Malaysia too cannot take note of this document and is gravely concerned about the floating use of the recovery index and the regeneration rates terminology used in this proposal. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malaysia. Do we have any further requests from parties for the floor? Indonesia, you have the floor, to be followed by Togo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Indonesia would like to align herself with the statement made by committee members from North America and Africa. Indonesia agrees that this proposal issue is not suitable to be discussed at this forum. This issue is better discussed more elaborately in the upcoming NDF workshop at the end of this year. Overall, Indonesia believes that first, sustainable production of timber can and should also be made from non-forest domain in line with CITES Resolution 16.6 on CITES and livelihood. And two, the proposed 100% recovery index criteria is not feasible for most of forest management models in tropical Asia, other than monoculture forest plantation. If we may explain, timber production in Indonesia involves smallholders who voluntarily plant timber species as sort of saving in their own land with small to medium-sized area operated in agroforestry type management. Such practice supports many communities' livelihood and helps in lowering pressure to the forest. The type of land is certainly a non-forest domain, but possess recognized tenurial rights. CITES acknowledge rural communities' empowerment, which one of the measures is by recognizing resource tenure and ownership, as can be referred to Resolution 16.6. Neglecting products originating from this type of land wouldn't be accurate for implementation of this convention. Moreover, in the 100% criteria, in our understanding, 100% recovery index could only be achieved in a monoculture forest plantation that usually operated on a large scale by enriching section in the recovering stage following a harvest. Such target is not known for other models of forest management, such as selected cuttings, at least in tropical Asia, which forests contain highly variable species and complex environmental factors. We believe this application of this criterion should be reconsidered. Thank you.
Thank you to the representative from Indonesia. I now give the floor to Togo. Thank you, Madam Chair. As it's the first time I am speaking, I would like to join those who have spoken before me on congratulating you on your re-election. I'd also like to thank the Secretariat for this very important meeting, and I'd like to thank Switzerland and Geneva for hosting us. I don't have a lot to say. I would just like to support the arguments put forward by Cameroon on this point. I support the arguments put forward by Cameroon. Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
I thank you. I regret to announce that I will not be able to give the floor to observers, given the delay we have accumulated. We have heard members of the committee and observer parties, and the Plants Committee takes note of the concerns raised by document PC 26 Doc 18, which was submitted by the European Union, and agrees to invite the Secretariat to issue a notification to transmit all returns and feedback to the European Union.
Merci. Nous passons.
Thank you. We now will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is on African tree species. The document was prepared by the Secretariat and it is document PC 26, Doc 32. I give the floor to the Secretariat.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Secretariat prepared document 32 on African tree species on your request. Regarding paragraph A of decision 19254, Annex 1 of the document contains an updated overview of African tree species listed in the CITES appendices. Regarding paragraph B of decision 19254, Annexes 2 and 3 of the document compile recommendations and discussions on the sustainable management of Prunus africana. Based on this and other available information, the Plants Committee is invited to review and, as appropriate, revise the list of African tree species and associated CITES processes. B, establish priorities to strengthen the implementation of the Convention for African Tree Species, including priorities and recommendations for the sustainable management and future work on Prunus africana, and including linkages with the CITES Tree Species Program as appropriate. And C, formulate recommendations to the Standing Committee or the Conference of the Party as appropriate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the Secretariat, and I now open the floor for members of the committee. I do not see any request for the floor, so I open the floor to observer parties. I see no request for the floor. I now give the floor to observers. I see no request for the floor.
Nous allons, le comité pour les plantes.
The Plants Committee shall establish an in-session working group. The terms of reference will be read by the Secretariat. Secretariat, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The in-session working group shall A, review and as appropriate revise the list of African tree species and associated CITES processes contained in Annex 1 to document PC 26, document 32. B, based on Annexes 2 and 3 to document PC 26, document 32 and other relevant information, establish priorities to strengthen the implementation of the Convention for African Tree Species, including priorities and recommendations for the sustainable management and future work on Prunus africana, and including linkages with the CITES Tree Species Program as per paragraph 7 of document PC 26, doc 32, and report its recommendations to the committee. Thank you.
Merci, Secretariat.
I thank the Secretariat. Now I shall open. I would like to ask those who wish to participate in the working group to please raise your nameplates. Committee members. Africa.
Non, je donne la parole.
Now I open the list to observer parties.
Madagascar.
Madagascar, United Kingdom, DRC, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Germany, United States. Now, observers who wish to participate. Portugal also. Zimbabwe, European Union as parties. WRI, WWF. I'm afraid I can't read that nameplate.
CIEL, the Center for International Environmental Law. Thank you.
Okay, merci.
Thank you.
Et ITTO.
ITTO.
Plus d'autres.
ITTO, the interpreter.
Secretariat, pouvez-vous?
Could the Secretary please read the list for us?
Yes, so the working group will be chaired by the representative for Africa and the alternate representative for Africa. Its members of the committee are the African region representative. Parties are Madagascar, the United Kingdom, the DRC, Netherlands, Switzerland, Germany, USA, Portugal, Zimbabwe, and the EU. And IGOs and NGOs are WRI, WWF, Center for International and Environmental Law, and ITTO. Thanks.
Merci.
Thank you to the Secretariat. Now we shall move to the next item on the agenda, which is on neotropical tree species, and I give the floor to the Secretariat to present document PC26, Doc 33.
Thank you, Chair. Document 33 on neotropical tree species follows a similar approach as the document that we just discussed. At COP19, the parties adopted decisions 19.257 to 19.260, which are included in paragraph 2 of the document. The document also highlights the new listings of neotropical tree species that were adopted at COP19, including Androanthus, Rhosodendron, Dabebuya, and Dipteryx, all of them with annotation 17 and with a delayed implementation of 24 months. Additionally, the COP adopted an amendment to annotation 10 of Brasilia, as reflected in paragraph 4 of the document. The document also recognizes the contributions of the CITES tree species program for the implementation of listings of neotropical tree species. With this in mind, Madam Chair, the Plants Committee is invited to review and, as appropriate, revise the list of neotropical tree species and associated processes as contained in the annex to the document, to establish priorities for strengthening the implementation of the Convention for Neotropical Tree Species, including linkages with the CTSP, to identify avenues to cooperate with parties in making progress with the priorities identified, and to report on the results of this work to the Standing Committee or to the Conference of the Parties as appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, Secretariat.
Thank you to the Secretariat. The floor is now open to committee members. I don't see any requests for the floor from committee members. Observer parties now have the floor. There seem to be no requests for the floor. Observers do not seem to wish to take the floor either. As with the item on African tree species, we are going to establish an in-session working group. I would like to ask the Secretariat to read out the terms of reference.
In the interest of time, the mandate of the working group would follow the same as of paragraph 7 of the document from paragraphs A, B, and C, with an additional mandate to D that would read to draft recommendations for the Plans Committee to consider and submit to the Standing Committee and or the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, Secretary.
Thank you. You have now heard the proposed mandate. Could you now let me know which members of the Plants Committee would like to participate in the work of the in-session working group? The floor is open.
Région Amérique centrale et du Sud.
Central and South America and the Caribbean. I would now like to turn to observer parties. The United Kingdom, Germany, Belgium, the United States, Portugal, the Netherlands. I would now like to turn to observers. SSN, ITTO, WRI, Traffic, WWF. Thank you. Could I invite the Secretariat to read out the membership of the working group?
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps we missed some in the list, so please let us know. So for now, we have a representative of the Central South American, the Caribbean region. In terms of parties, we have the United Kingdom, Germany, Belgium, USA, Portugal, and the Netherlands. And for the observers, we have SSN, ITTO, WRI, Traffic, and WWF.
Merci, Secrétariat.
I'd like to thank the Secretariat. The representative of the Central and South America and the Caribbean and their alternate will be co-chairing this working group. Thank you. We are now going to turn to agenda item 30. The Secretariat will introduce this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Document PC 26, Doc 30 on products containing specimen of Appendix 2 orchids presents progress in the implementation of Decision 19246. In accordance with 19246 paragraph A, the Secretariat has included in Annexes 1 and 2 to this document the study entitled A Review of the Edible Orchid Trade and its Supplementary Material. The study lists orchid species known to be edible, compiles information on international trade in food products that contain orchid specimen, analyzes whether this trade appears to be registered in the CITES trade database, and reviews available information on the conservation impacts of such trade. It finds that harvest of tuberous orchids appears to be mostly from the wild, is destructive to the entire plant, involves many tens of millions of individuals per year, and affects many tuberous orchid taxa rather indiscriminately. International trade in this species has a large and growing volume and may be more valuable and may be used in larger variety of high-end products than previously thought. Local and regional depletions of some genera of tuberous orchids used in this trade, even within protected areas, appear to have occurred across range states in Central Africa and the Near and Middle East. This international trade in tuberous orchid products should be regulated under CITES, but little, if any, seems to be registered in the CITES database. Almost every aspect of this trade is described as opaque. Significantly, the study highlights that most of this trade is being undertaken unregulated by CITES. The Secretariat believes that action should be taken to address this matter. Regarding the study referred to in Decision 19246B, the Secretariat has not yet secured the necessary funding, and draft URs of this study are available in Annex 3 for the consideration of the committee. Based on this and any other available information, the committee is invited to A, review the present document and its annexes, B, advise the Secretariat on draft terms of reference for the study referred to in Decision 19246 paragraph B, including the most appropriate scope, and C, in accordance with Decision 19247, make recommendations on how to improve CITES compliance for Appendix 2 listed orchids to the Standing Committee or the Conference of the Parties as appropriate. Thank you.
Merci.
I would like to thank the Secretariat. The floor is now open to members of the Plants Committee.
Je ne vois pas.
I do not see any requests for the floor from members. I would now like to turn to observer parties. The United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We appreciate the considerable work that has been done with regard to this subject to date and appreciate the Secretariat's document here. With regard to the draft terms of reference contained in the annex to this document, we have a couple of questions with regard to those TORs. Specifically, it's not entirely clear from the activities under paragraph 1 what would constitute a potential concern based on an analysis of the trade data. Would it be a shift from wild to artificially propagated specimens, trade shift across the range states, or something else? We also think it will be important not only to consider the study included in the annex to this document, but previous work done on Appendix 2 orchid taxa to date as well, including the considerable prior work supported by Switzerland. These are a couple of the issues that we think should be taken into consideration in finalizing the terms of reference for this future study. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I would like to thank the United States. Would any other observer parties like to take the floor?
Je donne la parole au secrétariat pour...
I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat to reply to the questions put by the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A very quick reply that we will consider your observations, including what concern a shift, a concern based on the trade data. And I would also simply reply that we obviously intend to consider all information available, and that includes work submitted by Switzerland or others. And we will integrate those in the TORs once we have funding to actually implement the study. Thank you.
Donc, merci.
I would like to thank you for your patience. We are going to set up a small in-session working group to be chaired by the representative for Europe. Could I ask the Secretariat to read out the terms of reference, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The in-session working group shall review document PC 26, Doc 30 and its annexes in accordance with decision 19247, draft recommendations on how to improve CITES compliance for Appendix 2 listed orchids for the Plants Committee to consider and to submit to the Standing Committee or the Conference of the Parties as appropriate, and report its recommendations to the committee. Thanks.
Merci, secrétaire.
Thank you, sir. Could I ask who would like to participate in this small working group? I see Asia, Europe, observer parties, France, the United States, Germany, Slovakia, China, Switzerland, the United Kingdom. As well as India, Zimbabwe, and the European Union.
Maintenant,
now, I'd like to turn to the observers. Traffic. Thank you. Could I ask the Secretariat to read out the working group membership? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The working group will be chaired by the representative of Europe, Ms. Nolene Smith. Members of the working group that are members of the PC are the representatives of Asia and Europe. Parties to join the working group are France, the USA, Germany, Slovakia, China, Switzerland, UK, India, Zimbabwe, and the European Union. And traffic joins as an observer. Thanks.
merci. Nous passons.
Thank you. We're now going to move on to our next agenda item. The document on this agenda item was drafted by the Secretariat, and I would like to give them the floor.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Document PC 26, Doc 31 on Brazil wood refers to the decisions that at COP19 the parties adopted regarding an annotation that was agreed for amendment regarding the listing of Brazil wood, or the species name Pau-Brasilia equinata. So at COP19, the parties agreed for an amendment to that listing to read as follows. All parts, derivatives, and finished products except re-export of finished musical instruments, finished musical instrument accessories, and finished musical instrument parts. As a complement to this amendment, the COP adopted decisions 19.249 to 19.253 to further assess and monitor the implications of this annotation on the conservation and international trade of Brazil wood. Decision 19.249 calls for the Secretariat to undertake a study subject to external resources to assess this. In anticipation of funds being available, in the Annex 1 to the present document, we have included draft terms of reference for its implementation. Madam Chair, the Plans Committee is invited to advise the Secretariat on the draft terms of reference contained in the Annex 1 to the present document, and taking also into account the responses contained in Annex 2 to the document, which refer to a notification that the Secretariat issued ahead of presenting this document at the present meeting. Thank you.
Merci.
I would like to thank the Secretariat for that presentation and turn to the Plants Committee members. Do you have any comments to make on document 31? I would like to give the floor to the representative of Central and South America and the Caribbean. Thank you, Madam. We have had the opportunity to discuss this document with Brazil, whom we represent here. And we decided that with respect to the document, we need to suggest an amendment to 1.1, where there is a question of considering bibliographical data on the traceability of timber and timber species in trade, which could be useful to stop the trade of bows, which we need to have a traceability system that also takes into account unfinished good products. And we also need to ensure any consideration of what is wasted or lost with respect to the production of these bows. That is what we have to suggest, Madam.
Je vous remercie. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I would now like to give the floor to the representative for North America.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the North American region, I would like to thank the Secretariat for submitting document 31 on Brazil wood, Pau Brasilia echinata. The North American region wishes to acknowledge and commend the ongoing engagement of the members of the musical sector. We believe that their ongoing engagement in discussions involving Pau Brasilia echinata and provision of expert information regarding the conservation and sustainable use at COP19 and since then have contributed positively to efforts by CITES parties to ensure implementation of the Convention for Pau Brasilia and an equitable outcome for all concerned. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci.
I would like to thank the representative for North America. Could I ask if any observer parties would like to take the floor on this item? I don't see any requests for the floor from observer parties. Could I ask if any observers would like to take the floor? The ITTO has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to inform the committee that ITTO has been liaising with representatives of bow manufacturers and also the CITES Secretariat on ways that we could perhaps work together to implement aspects of the relevant CITES decisions on this species. We're also trying to set up a call with representatives of the Brazilian Scientific Authority, IBAMA, during this week to discuss with them the parts of the decision which relate to the trees growing in Brazil. The only other thing I would add is that it's probably worth bearing in mind that we may want to be looking at different, at least some differences in the type of traceability or tracking system we decide to work with if we're looking at finished products like bows compared to raw materials that go into bows. Thank you.
Merci au représentant.
I'd like to thank the ITTO representative. You have the floor. To be followed by SSN. Sir, do go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. We thank the Secretariat for the preparation of document 31 and for the opportunity to speak on behalf of music instrument stakeholders today. The amendments to annotation #10 adopted at the 19th Conference of the Parties established new export permit restrictions on exports of Pau Brasilia echinata while enabling the subsequent non-commercial and commercial cross-border movement of finished musical instruments and preventing the imposition of unnecessary permit burdens on CITES management authorities. the implementation of revised annotation #10 together with accompanying decisions 19.249 to 19.253 has reassured the music sector of the effectiveness of CITES and indicated directions for future action. For over 20 years, bow makers have worked with governmental, scientific, and environmental partners in Brazil to conserve Pernambuco. Our community, along with organizations representing musicians, ensembles, and orchestras, have worked to inform our constituents of the results of COP19. We've progressed in discussions with the music sector and with other stakeholders regarding possible approaches to traceability for newly made bows. We've created new public guidance for sellers and makers and to help musicians be more informed owners and consumers of bows for stringed instruments. And we've urged continued action in support of science and conservation of the species. PC 26 INF Doc 4 reflects this work, outlining how music instrument stakeholders are taking action in response to the agreed decisions. INF Doc 4 also contains the music sector's response to the CITES Secretariat questionnaire issued in notification 2023/033, as does document 31. With respect to the draft terms of reference contained in Annex 1 of document 31, study on improved implementation of the Appendix 2 listing of Pau Brasilia echinata, we would suggest that the activities to be completed under outputs 1 and 2, and in particular activities 1.1 and 2.2, include discretion to conduct consultation with parties and stakeholders as needed in order to take account of activities that may have progressed since the questionnaire responses were submitted by stakeholders. As the Secretariat and the parties further implement revised annotation #10 and decisions 19.249 to 19.253, we stand ready to partner with all CITES stakeholders, and especially the government of Brazil, to achieve outcomes that will conserve Pau Brasilia echinata while facilitating ongoing trade and cultural activity involving musical instruments. Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. SSN, you have the floor. Thank you, Madam. We would like to express our support for what was said by the representative for Central and South America and the Caribbean. We do think it's important to recall that we're talking about an endemic species that is found only in Brazil. We need to take traceability systems into account, and that has to be take into account the pieces used to produce the bows, as well as the waste that is produced as the production of new finished bows. This is a concern that has been expressed by the only range state for the species. And this is important when it comes to avoiding any kind of laundering when it comes to the trade in this product, which is the best product in the world when it comes to actually making violin bows. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. The committee would invite the Secretariat to take into account comments made at this meeting in reviewing the terms of reference in Annex 1 when it comes to acting according to Decision 19.249. Thank you.
Nous allons passer à l'examen du point suivant.
We're now going to turn to the next agenda item, which has to do with trade in medicinal and aromatic plant species. And I would like to invite the Secretariat to introduce the document. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Document PC 26, Doc 34 2016/AC32 Doc 41 and its addendum present progress in the implementation of Decision 19261 to 19264 on trade in medicinal and aromatic plants. Decision 19263 requests the Plants Committee to undertake a review of Resolution 10.19, RevCop 14, on traditional medicines, and to prepare recommendations for a revised resolution on traditional medicines or a new resolution on medicinal and aromatic plant products. The Secretariat also notes that any revision of the resolution on traditional medicines would warrant the involvement of the Animals Committee. In accordance with Decision 19261D, paragraph 6 of the document contains initial suggestions that could be considered in such a review. The Secretariat has currently not yet secured funding for a study in accordance with Decision 19261C, and the Secretariat welcomes the Committee's views on the proposed TORs for this study, which are contained in Annex 1 of the document. In accordance with Decision 19261A III, the addendum compiles and analyzes responses to notification 2023/045, in which parties share experiences of using the MPNS database and their views on using it in CITES routine work. Based on this and any other available information, the committee is invited to A. Review documents PC 25, Doc 30, COP 18, Inf 11, and the present document and their addenda, and initiate the process to inform recommendations for a revised resolution on traditional medicines or a new resolution on medicinal and aromatic plant products. B. Consider the draft terms of reference contained in Annex 1 of the document and propose amendments. C. Consider the responses to notification 2023/045 as presented in the addendum and advise on the options provided by the Secretariat in paragraph 8. D. Consider the establishment of an intersessional working group with representation of the Animals Committee as appropriate, taking into consideration the potential terms of reference contained in Annex 2 to the document. And to E. Draft recommendations to the Standing Committee or the Conference of the Parties as appropriate. Thank you.
Merci, Secretariat.
I thank the Secretariat, and I now await comments from members of the committee. North America, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Countries in the North American region have suggestions and recommendations to make concerning the terms of reference in Annex 1 for the analysis called for in Decision 19.261, paragraph C. We also have some views on the list of matters that the Secretariat suggested to be considered in paragraph 6 of document 34 concerning the review of the existing resolution Conf 10.19, or if opted for, a possible new resolution on medicinal and aromatic plants. And finally, we have some suggestions regarding the proposed terms of reference in Annex 2 for the intersessional working group, which we support. We understood there may be an in-session working group this week, and if so, we would look forward to discussing these matters during the in-session working group. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci au représentant.
I thank the representative of the North America region, and I now give the floor to observer parties.
Je ne vois pas de demande.
I see no request for the floor. I now open the floor for observers.
Je ne vois pas de demande de parole.
I see no request for the floor.
Merci.
I thank you. So it has been requested that we establish an intersessional working group.
Il est demandé un groupe de travail en session.
An in-session working group, says the chair. We shall read the terms of reference for the working group. Secretariat, could you please read the terms of reference?
Working group shall A. Consider the draft TORs for the study referred to in Decision 19261, paragraph C, contained in Annex 1 to the document and propose amendments as appropriate. B. Consider the responses to notification 2023/045 as presented in the addendum to document PC 26.34/AC32.41 and advise on the options provided by the Secretariat in paragraph 8. In accordance with Decision 19263, paragraph B, taking into consideration the information in document PC 25.30 and its addendum information document COP 1811, document PC 26.34 and /AC32.41 and other relevant information, initiate the process to inform recommendations for a revised resolution on traditional medicines or a new resolution on medicinal and aromatic plant products. D. Consider the establishment of an intersessional working group with representation of the Animals Committee as appropriate, taking into consideration the potential TORs contained in Annex 2 to document PC 26.34/AC32.41, and E. Based on the above, draft recommendations for the Plants Committee to consider and submit to the Standing Committee or the Conference of the Parties as appropriate and report its recommendations to the Committee. Thanks.
Merci, Secrétariat.
I thank the Secretariat and would now like to request those who wish to participate in this group to please raise their flags. Committee members, so we have the representative for the European region, representative for Asia region, and North America. Now we move to observer parties who wish to participate. United Kingdom, the Republic of Korea, USA, EU, Singapore, Austria, Slovakia, China, Germany, Russian Federation, India, and now observers. UNEP, WCMC traffic. Could you please raise the nameplates or tell us? American Herbal Products Association.
Industria derivati naturali.
Je vais demander.
I will now ask the Secretariat to please read the list of the members of the working group.
Thank you. The working group will be chaired by the representative of Europe, Ms. Moser. Members to join the working group are the North American region, Mr. Bowles. Parties who signed up are the UK, Korea, USA, European Union, Singapore, Austria, Slovakia, China, Germany, Russia, and India. And IGOs and NGOs are UNEP, WCMC, Traffic, American Herbal Products Association, and I understood Industria Naturale. Oh, it's Industria Derivati Naturali. Is that correct? Sorry.
Correct.
Okay.
Merci.
Oh, sorry, I apparently forgot Asia. Is that? And Africa. Okay, thanks.
Merci.
Thank you. We shall now move to consideration of the next item on our agenda, which is on annotations. So the document is document 36. It was submitted by the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and I give you the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Document 36 of PC 26 and 32 of AC 43 defines the terms of reference for the Annotations Working Group. Standing Committee 76 re-established the working group, and the terms of reference are outlined in Decision 16.162 Rev Cop 19, and they are as follows. Directed to the Standing Committee in close collaboration with the Animals and Plants Committees. A, in close collaboration with ongoing efforts in the Plants Committee to continue reviewing the appropriateness and practical challenges resulting from the implementation of annotations to the appendices, including but not limited to those on tree species of the agar wood-producing taxa Aquilaria spp and Geronops spp, Aniba roseodora, Bulnesia sarmentoi, and orchids, and to identify options to streamline these annotations, taking into account the guidance provided by Resolution Conf 11.21 Rev Cop 19 on use of annotations in Appendices 1 and 2. Paragraph B, to develop or define definitions of terms used in current annotations as appropriate and submit them for adoption by Conference of the Parties and subsequent inclusion in the interpretation section of the appendices. C, to review and update the definitions of wood and wood products currently located in paragraph 1C of Resolution Conf 1013, Rev Cop 18, on implementation of the Convention for Tree Species for logs, sawnwood, veneer sheets, and plywood. Paragraph D, to conduct any work related to annotations directed to it by the Conference of the Parties, the Standing Animals or Plants Committee, and E, to prepare reports on progress made in addressing the issues tasked to it and submit them for consideration at the 77th or 78th meetings of the Standing Committee. In Document 36, the recommendations state that the Plants Committee is invited to agree on which of its members will participate in the Standing Committee's intersessional working group on annotations, to offer comments and guidance regarding the tasks included in the working group terms of reference as presented in paragraph 2 of the present document, and in particular paragraphs A and C, and to suggest any additional work related to annotations that could be directed to the working group as per paragraph D of Decision 16.162 Rev Cop 19. I would like to highlight that notification number 2023-36 outlines the membership of the working group. And lastly, we have not yet engaged in discussions via email with the working group due to delay in communications on our side, but this will be resumed following conclusion of the present meeting. Thank you, Chair.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom, and I give the floor to committee members.
Amérique du Nord.
North America region.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The North American region supports increased involvement of the Plants and Animals Committees in the Standing Committee's Annotation Working Group, and believes that a priority task for the working group should be to resolve the few issues on which the working group began but did not complete its discussions during the last intersessional period. This includes the need for guidance with regard to Aniba roseodora and Bulnesia sarmentoi, and trade in extract essential oil, particularly related to at what point extract becomes a commodity no longer subject to CITES controls. We note as well a new significant action directed to the working group to review and update definitions of wood and wood products currently located in paragraph 1C of Resolution Conf 10.13 Rev Cop 18 on implementation of the Convention for Tree Species for logs, sawnwood, veneer sheets, and plywood, some of which are based on harmonized system codes which have been amended by the World Customs Organization since having been adopted by CITES. We would also emphasize the need for this exercise to include consultation with enforcement authorities, including frontline officers. We note also that multiple documents are being considered at PC26 that have raised concerns with regard to the harvest and trade in agarwood, and we believe that it would be useful for the working group also to prioritize reviewing annotation #14. The North American region has not identified any annotations related to CITES listed animal species that require consideration during the current intersessional period. But if other committee members or parties identify any such annotations, we believe that the Standing Committee's working group should be requested to discuss those issues separately from the plant annotation work. And finally, Madam Chair, the North American region wishes to congratulate the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland for assuming the chair of the Standing Committee Working Group on Annotations and offers its support to the chair and the working group going forward. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant.
I thank the representative of the North American region, and I now give the floor to observer parties. I see no request for the floor, so I now open the floor to observers.
Je ne vois pas.
I do not see any request for the floor.
Merci.
Thank you. The Plants Committee agrees to nominate the representative, Mr. Vos and Mr. de Boer, to participate in the Standing Committee's Intersessional Working Group on Annotations. We take notes of the tasks in paragraph 2 of document PC 26 Doc 36 and AC 32 Doc 43, as well as paragraphs A and C. We invite the committee invites the working group to look at the following additional elements in accordance with paragraph D of decision 16162 Rev Cop 19.
Nous passons maintenant.
So we shall now move to consideration of agenda item 37, and I give the floor to the Secretariat to present this.
Thank you, Chair. Document 37 on annotation 15 makes reference to the revisions to decisions 18.321 to 18.322 on annotation 15 as reflected in paragraph 2 of the present document. The Rev Cop 19 decision 18.321 calls the Secretariat to undertake a study to assess the conservation implications of the exemptions of annotation 15 for rosewoods of the genus Dalbergia and Giburtia listed in the appendices. The Secretariat is pleased to confirm that it has secured the needed resources for the implementation of the study, and in preparation for this, it has included draft terms of reference for consideration at the present meeting in the Annex 1 to the document. Madam Chair, the Plans Committee is invited to review the document and its annexes, to provide feedback to the draft terms of reference included in Annex 1 to the present document, and to make recommendations to the Secretariat in preparation for its reporting to the Standing Committee in accordance with Decision 18.3222, Rev. COP 19. Thank you, Chair.
Merci.
I thank the Secretariat. I'm going to open the floor now to members of the Plants Committee. North America region, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the Secretariat for the preparation of this document, which provides terms of reference for a study to assess the effect on Dalbergia and Gibutia species in international trade of the exemptions for finished musical instruments, parts, and accessories contained in Annotation 15, pursuant to Decision 18.321. As I mentioned earlier today, the North American region noted the overlap and potential duplication of effort between this study and the broader study on international trade in all rosewood tree species, as discussed in Document 29. We had suggested the broader study under Document 29 take place before the one described in this document. Countries in our region have specific suggestions to offer to amend the terms of reference found in Annex 1, with a view of maximizing the benefits and minimizing duplication between these two studies. For example, we suggest the goals of the study might be achieved in a cost-effective manner through undertaking just the desk study described in Activity 1 in the draft terms of reference in Annex 1 to the document. Countries in our region will be happy to provide more specific inputs to these terms of reference. Thank you, Chair.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of North America. And I now I give the floor to observer parties who wish to comment.
États-Unis, vous avez la...
USA, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As our colleague, the representative from North America, indicated, we believe that the activities contemplated under Activity 2, which is design of a fieldwork protocol and implementation of a representative set of case studies in selected sites and range states, is perhaps unnecessary, and we believe that the proposed study should focus on the other two activities. At a minimum, we think that we should take a stepwise approach, with the potential value of fieldwork under Activity 2 being considered only after we have the results of the desk study and consultations. We also note that the parties have recommended in Resolution Conf 11.21, Rev Cop 18, that parties consider the conservation impact of excluding certain specimens from CITES provisions and ensure that annotations to listings in the appendices include those specimens that first appear in international trade as exports from range states and that dominate the trade and the demand from the wild. We believe that the study should focus, among other things, on whether annotation #15 adheres to the guidance and principles in that resolution. And if it does not, consideration should be given to whether amendments to the annotation, the guidance and principles, or both are warranted. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci.
I thank the United States. Do we have, I see a request from Canada. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Canada notes the process under Decision 321, which directs the Secretariat to undertake a study to assess the effect on Dalbergia and Guibordia species in international trade of the exemptions for finished musical instruments, parts, and accessories contained in annotation #15. Canada is concerned by the timing of the study and the extent to which the effect on Dalbergia and Guibordia species in international trade of the exemptions for finished musical parts and accessories and instruments can be detected so soon after their adoption at COP18 in 2019, or differentiated from the confounding effect on trade of the recent COVID-19 pandemic. Understanding the study proposed is by any measure complicated and complex, we believe there are effective steps that can be taken to generate efficiencies and avoid potential duplication of effort. For example, we note that decisions 19243 and 19244 on rosewood tree species in PC 26 document 29 direct the Secretariat to commission a study on international trade in all rosewood tree species. We believe that this broadly based study really does have greater potential to generate relevant trade information, and more so than does the more narrow study called for in PC 26 Doc 37. Indeed, it may be that a direct comparison of non-exempted Dalbergia commodities in international trade with finished musical instruments, parts, and accessories exempted under annotation #15 will yield greater statistical insight than will focusing on a single commodity group whose trade is unregulated by CITES. Regardless, Canada believes that to minimize duplication of effort and expense, the PC 26 document 29 rosewood tree species study should seek to include elements of the annotation #15 study, or at the very least be undertaken with the goals of that study in mind. Thank you, Chair.
Je vous remercie.
I thank you. Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In line with the proposals made by the USA and Canada, we also have some amendment proposals which are specific to the terms of reference in document 29. And we want to ensure it has elements that are relevant to the terms of reference to ensure that we avoid duplication and we reduce costs. We can send these directly to the Secretariat to save time. And we'd be grateful if the Plants Committee could take into account the proposals to achieve the expected results in a more efficient way. We already talked about it sufficiently under document 29. There is maybe some duplication between this document and that one, and we'll send our comments to the Secretariat.
Je vous remercie.
I thank you.
En raison du temps qui nous reste. Donc,
I suggest that we conclude to use the time we have left. So the Plants Committee invites the Secretariat to take account of the comments made during the plenary meeting on the examination of document PC 26, Doc 37, and to consider document 29 as well under the terms of reference in Annex 1 and the carrying out of the study.
merci. J'aurais une requête.
Thank you. I would have a special request for the interpreters. Would it be possible to have 15 more, 10 to 15 minutes. 10 minutes more. Yes, Chair, the interpreters agree. I see that we have observers who wish to speak. My apologies for cutting you off earlier. WRI and first of all, WRI, please. And then the second speaker will take the floor afterwards. I'm afraid I can't read your name. WRI, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just aside from agreeing with the intervention by Canada, which I think is all true, I just wanted to make the point, coming from a research institute, that I think that the activity 2 listed in the annex here is unresearchable. We've done many, many studies on this kind of work on the forest sector, and it doesn't strike me as something that could actually be methodologically carried out in a high integrity way. It's not going to produce anything. So I think sticking with the other actions is the best way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to briefly comment on behalf of the League of American Orchestras and Musical Instrument stakeholders. We too wish to thank the Secretariat for the preparation of Doc 37 and the draft terms of reference for a study. The revisions to Annotation 15 adopted at the 18th Conference of the Parties have substantially supported non-commercial and commercial cross-border movement of finished musical instruments, while relieving CITES management authorities of unnecessary permit burdens. With the implementation of the revised Annotation 15, confidence in musical instrument trade and in the effectiveness of CITES has been significantly restored across the music sector. The draft terms of reference under Doc 37 Activity 1 call for supply chain, stakeholder, and expert consultations. We request that the Secretariat add consultation with CITES management authorities to ensure that the impact of the revised annotation on management authority permit burden is also taken into account. We also point out that in the years immediately following the revisions to Annotation 15 included unprecedented disruptions to trade patterns due to the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, as just mentioned. We recommend that the actions described in Activity 1 be completed before giving consideration to how to undertake representative case studies described in Activity 2. Finally, as previous referenced by North America and other stakeholders, we also take note of Doc 29, which refers to paragraph C of Decision 19.243 that calls to commission a study of the conservation and trade in rosewood tree species. We offer also for consideration that the separate study under discussion in Doc 37 to impact the assessments of revised Annotation 15 might benefit from being sequenced to follow after the completion of the broader rosewood study called for in Decision 19.243. As the Secretariat and the parties further implement these decisions on Annotation 15 and the terms of reference for the study, we stand ready to partner with all CITES stakeholders to achieve outcomes that conserve the species while facilitating ongoing trade and cultural activity involving musical instruments. Thank you.
Thank you. Very briefly, please, ITTO.
Chair, just again, based on our own experience with these trade studies, that some of which we've carried out for CITES, I would just caution that since we're dealing with products that are exempted from CITES, the data available to look at trade flows is going to be, how can I put this, not easy to obtain. The 6-digit global level harmonized system data, mostly, especially for higher level products like Chapter 92, doesn't break down into species level. So there's going to be a need in this study, which we also had to do, for a lot of consultation with countries which may have more detailed data, also consultation with musical instrument associations, et cetera, to try to get down to the amount of rosewood that is being imported in all musical instruments, et cetera. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you for those additional statements. We will certainly take your views into account. Thank you.
Ok. Merci. Nous allons passer à...
Thank you. We're going to move on to our next agenda item now.
Ok. Donc nous allons passer à...
The next item is 38. The Secretariat has the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam. This is your last item before lunch.
Let me start by congratulating the UK for assuming the chairing of the annotation working group, and also to pay tribute to Mr. Ken Farr, the previous chair, and Ms. Anne St. John that were also chairing, she was also chairing this working group at the beginning, and I hope that they could continue to support the discussions on annotations that has a long history and is a very complex discussion. Document 38 briefly reports on the implementation of decisions 18317 Rev Cop 19 and 19265 on something that is related to the previous discussions, which is an information system for trading specimens of CITES listed 3 species. The Secretariat has already estimated the cost of implementing the feasibility study mentioned in Decision 19265, and the cost is of $40,000 US. The Secretariat is making every effort to raise the funds for this activity and has identified an initial amount of $10,000. Parties and potential donors are therefore kindly encouraged to consider additional contributions to enable the Secretariat to commission the study. The Secretariat will present the terms of reference of the study at the 77th meeting of the Standing Committee based on the preliminary ideas outlined in document SC 74-82. And in closing, Madam Chair, the Plans Committee is invited to take note of this short document and is invited also to request you, the Chair of the Plans Committee and the Vice Chair, to provide comments on the Secretariat's draft terms of reference for the study when they are ready before submission to the Standing Committee meeting 77. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The floor is now open to members of the Plants Committee. North America, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The North American region notes the document and supports the suggestion that the Standing Committee and Plants Committee explore approaches for developing an information system for tracking and analysis of trade in CITES-listed tree species. However, our region is concerned about the scope of the information system proposed and suggests that the chair of the Plants Committee extend the consultations on the Secretariat's draft terms of reference to all members of the Plant Committee in advance of submission by the Secretariat to the Standing Committee at its 77th meeting in November 2023. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Asia has the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and we appreciate the Secretariat for preparing this document, and we agree the recommendations by the Northern America, and we also suggest that may we, change the time of the submission to the Standing Committee at its 78th meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Merci.
I'd like to thank the representative for Asia. Would anyone else like to take the floor? Any observer parties? It seems not. Observers? No. In that case, the Plants Committee takes note of the information provided by the Secretariat on the implementation of Decision 19265. And its instructions to the Chair and Vice Chair as amended by Asia and North America. The Secretariat, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam.
That at the 77 meeting, we are only submitting the draft terms of reference. If we submit the TORs to 78, we won't be able to provide anything for the COP. So I think that if you don't mind, we'll continue with the schedule as planned, which is to submit the draft TORs to the Standing Committee, expanding the consultation as suggested by North America and supported by Asia. And you will continue this conversation at the Standing Committee. And if you decide at the Standing Committee that you need more time before starting the study, we'll follow the instructions, the recommendations of the Standing Committee. I hope that this is agreeable. Thank you very much.
Merci, Secrétariat, pour ces...
Thank you for that clarification, sir. In other words, we have an unamended recommendation that we have adopted. Thank you. We have now used up the additional 10 minutes that we have. The Secretariat has a housekeeping announcement with respect to the in-session working groups. You have the floor, Secretariat.
Thank you, Chair. Just to point out that the working group schedule is being updated in the website. The working group on CITES and Forest will take place in this plenary room after lunch. And the working group on nomenclature will take place also after lunch today in room E2F. So room E is where to go for nomenclature. The rest of the working groups established today will be made available in the website. Thank you.
Merci, Secrétaire.
Thank you. We're going to conclude this morning's meeting. The Chair kindly thanks the interpreters.